Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math and Toonami. Here's how it's going to go. I'm going to talk about Toonami. I'm going to talk about what it is. I'm going to talk about its history to an extent. And I'm going to talk about my own experiences with Toonami over the years. And throughout all of that, I'm going to talk about how math has played a role in it, right? Across the board. In big ways and in smaller ways, right? Like kind of like on the surface and behind the scenes, and I look forward to just all of this. So with that in mind, I'm going to be talking about what Toonami is, like I said, as well as several shows that featured in it. I won't be going into spoilers, but if you want to play it safe, that's fair. I get that. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's rock. Yeah. So with Toonami, it initially started 25 years ago at the time of recording, back in 1997, and ran up until 2008, that first go. There was a 4-year break, and then it resurfaced in 2012. Then has been running since, and we'll get into all that a bit more. But the idea behind it, for the uninitiated, is that it's a block of largely animated shows, um, with the focus eventually being more on anime, Japanese animation. And that being said, there was a lot of North American animation in the beginning and throughout the years, and it gets interesting, I feel. But right off the bat, though, math is involved because you have this block of television. Like you have things running for hours on end, like and you have that running throughout the week initially. And what shows were featured? I mean, there's a lot to that, but they retooled several times, and I think that gets interesting too. And initially, while it was during the weekdays, um, it later would run on just Saturdays, and since its return, that's been the idea too. But let's get into it further. So, in the beginning, in 1997, that's where it all started, right? And here's the craziest thing. Well, not the craziest, but like what's interesting about it, what sets it apart, is like it wasn't just a block of television, right? It wasn't just show after show after show. There was a host. First, this host was Maltar, then later Tom. And we'll get into that a bit more later too. But the crazy thing is Maltar was from Space Ghost, and that's wild to me. So one of the things that I saw growing up was like Space Ghost, Coast to Coast, and then later on, you find out that, or I found out that there was a whole show from the '60s called Space Ghost. But anyway, there's a character called Moltar, and the idea was like villain turned producer, and he ended up being the host for that first 2 years, and then Tom would come. But the idea is like, so yes, there was a host that would introduce the shows, and as it got on, like, and as Tom came on, the format changed. There was like events, tie-ins. Well, they were particularly called ties. But anyway, like, so those were going on in the background. There was like music with these segments. There were promotions for the shows, promotion for the blocks. It was a whole thing. It was a good bit of marketing, and there was math in these formats and how things got to you, as well as the shows themselves. And let's say like they were doing their thing in 1997, but things really got kicked off when they introduced Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon into the picture. Like things exploded. And with Dragon Ball Z, for those who don't know, I am a big Dragon Ball fan, like period. And so, I was glad to see it on air. But for the record, that was not my first experience with Dragon Ball Z or just Dragon Ball in general. I had actually first came across Dragon Ball Z back when WB owned it, or not owned it, but they were showing it, right? Like, and here's the thing. Um, WB, back when it was a thing, back when it was a station, it and Cartoon Network were ultimately owned by Time Warner's. And there's more I want to say on that later, but the idea is like there was some back and forth. So you would see like some shows, i.e., some of the DC shows, pop up on Toonami from time to time. And Toonami for a stint was on Kids WB, but it ultimately didn't work out. And we could talk a little bit about that later too. But the idea is that again with Toonami, you had this block of television that for that initial run ran during the weekdays and was hosted, and like the shows are promoted and they amped you up, and there's math in all of it. So not only is there math um, in terms of what the block is and how long that runs, but there's math in the presentation, right? There was math and having these 3D environments and having the host go on journeys and introduce the show. You had to decide how long the promos were going to be. You had to have the music and have the math in that music, but then you had to balance out the music and the narration. And there's math in the animation of that hosting, right? And then there are the shows themselves. And I think that's pretty cool because when you look at the shows themselves, they're dealing with animation too, and in this case, they were able to show a lot of shows consistently because a lot of it was coming. Um, I was trying to word this how I wanted to word it, and it didn't go well. But the idea was like a lot of these shows are actually older, right? Like they were already done, and so they could run these pretty consistently, and that was pretty cool. And so it really blew up, and you had all sorts of shows on there. In terms of anime, you had things like I said, Dragon Ball Z. You had Sailor Moon. You had Card Captors for a stint. Pokemon at some point or another. Um, let's see what else. You had Tenchi, which I was not like a big fan of, but there was like three Tenchi shows because I think there was like a Tenchi Muyo, then Tenchi in Universe and Tenchi. No, sorry, Tenchi Universe and Tenchi in Tokyo. But there was also like Gundam Wing, which was big. Ronin the Warriors was on there for a while. Big O. There were a lot of different shows. Like eventually, the OG Dragon Ball show was on there. At some point, GT was Dragon Ball GT. That is, and not only did they have like that initial weekday run, but they had like different events. Like they had Toonami the Rising Sun, where they took that block, but they put it on the weekend. So there was like sometimes 2 hour block, sometimes 3 hour block, where they would run different shows. Dragon Ball Z was definitely featured. Sailor Moon sometimes. Again, these were really big popular shows. They also had the Midnight Run, which it varied, but like for a good stint, it was like an hour during the weekdays, like 12 to 1, and they would show things like Dragon Ball Z and Gundam Wing, but then some other things down the line. Eventually, that would get kicked off to Adult Swim, where they would have a lot of action anime, and then later when Toonami came back, it kind of went the other way. But all that stuff is interesting to me because like I grew up in part, watching Toonami, right? Like, because right, I started elementary school, through middle school, high school, and a bit of college. So, before time, kicks in, right? And then when it came back, watched several things on there. But back to the more math side of things, right? Like you not only have like this block and then like the shows in the block, but you have ratings to consider, merchandising, and also just like dubbing things over and how that whole process goes. And then within some of the shows themselves, again, like right, you're using animation in all those, and there's math in how everything is drawn up. There's math in how it's animated, how it gets to you. There's math in the coloring and the lighting, and how things are all like cut and how they get to you. There's math in how the characters are drawn. There's math in how characters are going to relate to one another, as well as different buildings and different things in those worlds. Right? You're considering geometry. You're considering proportions. You're considering a lot of things when you're getting those things to you on the screen. And in the case of like Dragon Ball Z, um, there were some things that they kind of like ripped right from the panel in a way, right? Like for the manga, and there's math in how all that works, right? Because a lot of the anime that was coming to you was coming from manga, and I think all that is interesting. And back to Dragon Ball Z, it definitely got a lot of attention, and thus a bit more time. And there's math in how all that goes, right? Like and I remember a lot of promos, and then I decided to like rewatch some, and it's interesting stuff because not only would they run these promos to talk about the shows, sometimes they would talk about like the characters, and again like Toonami as a whole, and there's math in these decisions and how they're made, and that there's a lot of money involved in all this, and that there's math in that, and I mentioned like the dubbing, there's math in like syncing everything up, math and what the voice actors are getting paid. And then there were some shows like Dragon Ball Z where they might have done different music, and that was interesting because like if you watched, uh, sorry, Dragon Ball Z sub and dub, you'll hear different things, right? For the soundtrack. So for the record, the Dragon Ball Z in this original version, like the music's great, but even though I think it was a weird decision to make different music for like the American version, the music was awesome. So there's that, but there's music. Sorry, there's math in the music, how it's constructed, how it's balanced and mixed, and there's math in how it's supposed to make you feel. And with that music, back to how the music shows up in the segments where Tom is like hosting things, right? You got a lot of like atmospheric music. Sometimes you got a lot of like quick paced music. The idea of just like it's setting the tone, it's getting you hyped. You're like, yeah, I'm gonna watch this show. So there's math in how all that works too, and it's something that you might not think about, but it's like at every step, right? Because you're creating these images, you're creating these sounds, and at the end of the day, none of that gets done without math. And it's the same for like the shows and how they're created, and how long they run, and for how long they run, and also, there's a point where they started running movies, and so there's math with how you fit that into the block, how you want to fit that into the block. Um, and with Toonami, um, so like I said, the first go around, right, 1997 to 2008. So it ran for a little over 11 years, and then it went away, and ratings were a part of that, from what I hear. And then in 2012, on April 1st, they ran Toonami, which it caught a lot of people off guard because for a while they were showing The Room, um, and so this was well received, and they asked people, Toonami, do you want it back? Pretty much, and so there was positive reception, and it came back, and again, it's been there ever since. Um, During that initial run, they did move things to Saturday. There was different blocks for that, but it was largely like evening to night. Since it's been back, it's been largely like late night, and it's featured a lot of like big anime. And again, there's money in that. Okay, so sorry. um, so yeah, with Toonami, it's been interesting because again, it's been around since 1997. It started 25 years ago. There was a 4-year break in between things though, and it wasn't just in America. It was international, and it ran from different places. It started in different places for different amount of time. Like UK, Australia, and Japan even had their own variation of that. From for what I hear, North American cartoons were kind of shown more. If anyone has personal experience with that, oh my god, please let me know. Um, but with that in mind, I had a lot of positive experiences with Toonami growing up. Um, and I watched it pretty regularly from 1997 up until like my college years, so around 2005, where I would still watch it, but it was a bit more infrequent because I was in college and, you know, studying and whatnot, and life, and just, all manner of things. But so I had um, I had a good experience with it, and on my end, there was math and getting to that point to watch Tanami, because I would get home from school at a certain time, and I would have to get sorry, I would have to get my homework done at a certain time so I can be able to watch it. And so there's that, and then just like the amount of time that I'm watching, this or that. So it was cool, and I got to enjoy Dragon Ball Z just frequently, because back when it was on WB for a stint, um, back when it was on WB, they would run it at least in my area on Saturdays. Some places it was Sunday, some it was like Friday, but that was a little bit more rare. Saturday and Sunday is the most common, and different time slots. But in any case, it was once a week, right? But when they started running it on Toonami, it was 5 days a week, and it's kind of funny because like back in the day, um, when they were running it on WB, it went from like that stuff with the Sand Saga, Raditz and Vegeta and Nappa and all that good stuff, up until the Frieza Saga, but only until Goku shows up on Planet Namek, and then it just kind of stops, and you don't get the rest of the whole Frieza Saga till you watch it several times on Toonami. And then they made a big deal of that too, and they promoted it and they hyped it up. It was great. Um, but yeah, there was a lot of different things going on with Tanami. Like I said, it was this block of animated television for the most part, focused on anime after a while. And during that initial go, like so many cool things happened. And since it's been back, a lot of cool things too. Um, but it was pivotal to my childhood as well as exploring more anime, which is something that carried over even after it was done, which is cool. And I don't get to watch as much anime as I would like in recent years, but whenever I do, like I mean, it's great. Um, and it's just like it's such a great art form. And there was also some American animation that would show up on there that was also great. Like some of it wasn't necessarily exclusive to Tsunami, or at least not until like later on. But you would even get things like Justice League and Justice League Unlimited at different points on that run, that first go around, like a little later on in it. But like you got stuff like that, and it was cool. There was one point where Beast Wars was on there, and that was weird. Reboot was on there, so it's like it wasn't just 2D animation, but it was mostly 2D animation. The 2D Clone Wars, that was a thing that was on there, and I think like in later years, the 3D one. Um, and a lot of people I know are familiar with the 3D, but for the 2D, if you haven't watched that 2D Clone Wars, you should. Um, if you have Disney Plus, you could look that up, and it's counted as a micro series. They put the episodes together and had like pretty much two episodes in that micro series where they're like an hour long or so. So you should look it up if you haven't seen it. And even if you have, you should look that up again. With that in mind, Toonami is just like there's so many shows that have gone through that, and it's just math across the board. Because like I said, there's math in the program and what it is and how it's structured. There's math in the animation. There's math in the music. Math in the lighting. Math in the sound overall and mixing everything up. and the individual shows all have math involved, whether it be math in an anime form or math in the manga from which a lot of those came from, right? And yeah, it just is math across the board. It's a beautiful thing, and I just glad that Toonami, was and is a thing, and I hope that people are still like discovering new things and having that expand their taste a bit. But yeah, so I wanted to talk about that, and so I have. I hope you learned something about Toonami, or you thought about a little bit differently about it with the map side, because it's like some of it feels like subtle, but it's all there. Math is everywhere and in everything, and I just like that. Not only was it in the structure and the marketing and all that, they were making sure you knew that, oh, this is coming on at this time and stuff like that. Like, oh, this is coming out this date, and just keeping you hyped up for it. It was cool. And so yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say about this. Hopefully, I covered everything that I wanted to cover with it, and I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one.